Chant 1966 Mighty Trip to Dubawnt and Thelon Rivers in Canada, Part 4. I hope you've been following this great adventure of mine and gone through it in order of Part 1, 2, and 3. This is going to be Part 4. I'm dedicating these to all those who pursue science as a way of increasing our collective knowledge about the world and our place in it. So I intend to cover here a paper that's based upon Art Moffatt's work, mite collecting and a paper that came out of that, a herpetology paper, tree line extension paper, a first fishing group that we met, Grant Lake fishermen, an individual by the name of Eugene Arima, Eskimo carvings and Stony Rapids, ending notes, canoeing pace, equipment. Was it worth it? And then I'm going to briefly show you some appendices. You could always stop the video and read them in a little bit more detail. When we get to them, I'll let you know about it. So let's look at the science of what we did. We went out to the Northern Canada area under a National Science Foundation grant and explain this in detail on the first video. My graduate training taught me that unpublished research is not research. You want to expand knowledge by adding to the sum total of known scientific information. So it wasn't just important to go out there and do science, but to let people know what we have done. In fact, two of my proudest accomplishments is during my academic career, I went out of my way to complete the draft thesis of a graduate student who unexpectedly died, and he was subsequently awarded the degree posthumously, and I also completed the process of getting a paper published by a colleague who unexpectedly died during the paper review process. I felt very strongly that their work needed to be publicized. So it was with some satisfaction that I saw that the collection of archaeological material by Art Moffatt, and we have been following his expedition throughout these 4 videos, that his collection will be helpful to other people because Elmer Harp published work on the Moffatt Archaeological Collection from the Dubawnt country, Canada. And it turns out in here that Mrs. Moffatt turned over to him the small collection gathered along the route, the Dubawnt River route, by members of the expedition, and graciously lent him her husband's journal for the light it might shed on the various sites in which artifacts were found. And this is Elma saying this. I have since been further aided by George Grinnell, one of the group, who checked with me in pinpointing site locations and helped to clarify the questionable associations of several specimens. And I assume that the collection is with Elmer right now, and it eventually will go into the museum at his college. So Don Chant was the one who got the big National Science Foundation grant, and he and his graduate student Roger Hansell are experts on mites. Mites are a type of arthropod. They're not an insect. They're a type of arthropod. And I'll show you a little bit about his collection technique. Remember that I'm limited to the number of slides that I retained from the hundreds I used to have. So the Riverside Press Enterprise published a couple of my slides in an article about our trip. This is one of the newspaper images that we try to lighten as much as possible. And the caption of the picture is the scientists began collecting mites shortly after flying to Waldia Lake. Funnels are filled with earth from which mites are extracted. Now, obviously, it's not very clear here, but that line of objects are Berlese funnels. That's probably Don or Roger standing up next to our tent. And for those of you, if this is your first of the 4 videos, Waldia Lake was a really, really interesting area. We didn't expect to see tundra there. It was tundra. We were below the tree line, and the funnels were lined up by this tent. I'll give you some background about a Berlese funnel. We have a funnel there. It is being held up by a ring tripod, which is not shown. At the bottom of the funnel, there is a mesh screen, and there is some preservative, probably alcohol. What you do is you put your sample on top of the mesh, maybe some tundra heath or soil sample, and then a heat source is applied to the top. And as the soil dries out or the heath dries out, it drives these small arthropods down. They go through the mesh and they fall into the preservative. Well, obviously we don't have electricity where we went, and so Don had a very clever way of doing this. He had baking pans. This is kind of like an optical illusion. Sometimes you'll see it correctly, sometimes you won't. And it's painted very deep black. So on sunny days it would absorb heat, and that heat would be transferred downward into the sample and drive the mites or anything else in there through the mesh into the preservative. So just like the Moffatt expedition, when there were sunny conditions, Art didn't want to waste that on canoeing to some extent. Instead, he wanted to film. And we had the same situation that doing this technique is possible during sunny days, not possible during the cloudy days or even rainy weather. Here's another photograph from the Press Enterprise, the December 4th, 1966 issue. This was really dark. Couldn't do much about enhancing it. The caption says, Dr. Donald Chant painstakingly collects mites. I mean, these are really small organisms in an enamel tray from a scrub brush in Canadian far north barrens. My collection was the purpose of a perilous trip, and I know I was there, by canoe and bush plane to the rim of Arctic Circle. We didn't quite get to the Arctic Circle. We came pretty close. And you can see that his socks are rolled up over his pants so that black flies don't go up your leg. And so Chant and Hansell published a major paper in the Canadian Journal of Zoology. They named 32 new species of mites, of which 9 of them came from our expedition. 9 of them. And I was honored that they named one of the new mite species after my name. And since it was named, people have moved this group into a different genus, but the trivial species name remains the same. They also did this for James Chillcott. And a lot of the other new species, the scientific name is named for Eskimo terms, which is appropriate. Jim Chillcott, as I've already told you, I think, died on his next field trip. And so even though there were papers published by him in 1966, those were in the pipeline. However, he did a lot of entomology work. He was an insect person, and here is from the Press Enterprise, the best I could do to enhance it and and the people at the library at Riverside helped as well. It says Jim Chillcott, Canadian government scientist, collects rare Arctic insects with a net, as a sweep net, among wildflowers on the tundra. He preserved and prepared more than 5,000 specimens for future study. Timber and background is typical of transition zone. Short spruces of no commercial value. Seen again is near Waldia Lake, northern Canada. And Jim had spent a lot of time above the tree line, very astute about changing of the seasons, very short seasons. And so he told me on August 10th that the season here at Grant Lake was very advanced, meaning the peaks for insects were over already. And there were very few insects, both number and species, out. And he was going to switch to an aspirator, hands and knees technique, on his hands and knees, collecting insect rather than this sweep net. Dubawnt Lake, south of us, because of its late melt, there's ice there pretty much all months except August, gave a false impression. And I'll show you an aspirator. An aspirator is a device that you suck up an insect into a vial. It doesn't go into your lungs because there is a barrier, mesh barrier there, but you can direct it to specific insects and capture them that way. So when I was looking for Chillcott 1966, I found this very interesting reference. This is a PhD thesis by William Robinson on flies. That's Chilcott's specialty. And when you do something like a revision, you then look at specimens in various collections. And I found out that, and I'll blow this up, that Jim was active in the fall of 1966. And you can see that one of the specimens that this PhD student looked at has J.G. Chillcott. And where was it collected? It was collected in Dubawnt Lake, August 2nd, 1966. So his collection is being used and will be used in the future by various students and scientists. And here we have Joel Weintraub. I'm not an entomologist. My background is in birds, but in graduate school, I specialize in herpetology, which are amphibians and reptiles. And up to the tree line, there's a possibility of capturing them. And so I published observations on basically the amphibians of Saskatchewan and a little bit up as far as Hindi Lake. The specimens, the entire sample, has been deposited in the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum, so anybody can go and take a look at my collections. And I acknowledge there I would like to thank Dr. Donald Chant for the opportunity to accompany this expedition and for his help during the trip. Acknowledgements are also due Mr. Roger Hansell and Dr. James Chillcott, who help with collections. And that might explain something that may puzzle you. If you look at the book by Hodgkins and Hoyle on canoeing north into the unknown, I didn't know that we were listed in here. I was really kind of surprised when I found that out. And these people searched the internet for any reference to the various canoe rivers in the north, and they picked up my herpetology paper. So the reference for our trip in the Dubawnt River section is 1966. Donald Chant, Roger Hansell, James Chillcott, and Joel Weintraub flew from Stony Rapids to Waldia Lake and canoed down the Dubawnt across Boyd and Carey Lakes to Aberdeen Lake, collecting amphibians and reptiles. Well, that's news to the rest of them. They were collecting mites and insects. So that's kind of a funny kind of footnote there. The party flew back to Stony Rapids, having experienced easy conditions on Dubawnt Lake. And the Canadian Field Naturalist is my herpetology article. The Arctic article, I'll show you what that is about. So the three of us, and I'm not sure why we didn't put a Chillcott on it, published an article about changes in the northern limit of spruce at Dubawnt Lake, Northwest Territories, showing that the tree line was going extending north. And in it, we acknowledge Dr. James Chillcott of the Canada Department of Agriculture for first observing some of these spruce plants. And I still have in my collection a slice of white spruce tree from this area, and I put that in plexiglass. So I want to thank a number of people that we met during our trip. We met a fishing group on July 26th, talked to the bush pilot there who gave us some important information, and we also have on the appendix a wish list of food we gave, or we were going to give the bush pilot. I'll explain that when we get to it. I thank that group. And here is a journal on that. So talking about these fishermen who we saw their camp earlier, but now we finally saw them in person. So these were the same people who had the camp at Nicholson. They were a fishing party, and we passed our long lunch hour with them. They told us some outside news, but more important, the guide, the bush pilot, actually told us that he was flying up to Baker Lake for supplies and would pick up anything we would want. He's leaving in 2 to 3 days. Great. Tonight we made up a food list, and with $60 we could splurge. That was about $600 in those days in terms of buying power. The list is on the left, and I'll put that in the appendix in a crude form. This did not guarantee he would pick up our list on the way up, and he actually didn't. Then deliver coming back from Baker. But we were all excited. He told us there wasn't any ice in Dubawnt. That was important, which eased our minds. It looks good that we will get the food, and then our breakfast will be infinitely better. So at least we thank him for that information about the ice on the Dubawnt. On Grant Lake, we met actually 2 fishing parties in the same camp. Group 1 was 6 people. We met Otto and Frank Stepavic, if I wrote that down in my journal. And then they were flown out, and another group of 6 came in, including Gordon, Dr. Ben Turner of Fort William, who I tried hard to locate. I tried to locate anybody in my journal. I did get a Ben Turner up there who returned my email and said he wasn't born yet in 1966. Ray. So I did a lot of searching. Didn't find too many people. After all, 1966 is 55 years ago. At Aberdeen Lake, we ran into an individual that I did find in my searches for this video. So here's a journal. Roger came back before supper with Eugene. an ethnologist operating out of the Canadian National Museum. He came up from Baker to collect driftwood to build, with the help of an Eskimo at Baker, a kayak to be eventually given to the museum. He stayed for supper, etc., etc. And another one, Eugene hiked over and spent most of the afternoon with us. He brought us about a pound of sugar and some tea. That's better than champagne. It looks like we will have enough of everything except maybe milk, unless the plane cannot reach us on the 30th. We talked of the Eskimos and canoes and kayaks. Another day. Spent the day visiting Eugene and Ka Ke-ma, who was an Eskimo in a tent nearby. His family was there. The 2+ mile hike to their camp at Aberdeen was a wet one, and I was glad when I arrived. I went to Eugene's tent first, which he had just acquired before he came here. It is modeled after the Eskimo tent, except for window areas and lacking a wood door. We spoke for an hour or more over a cup of tea. Ka Ke-ma, the Eskimo man, came down to the beach to go off in an outboard boat for fishing. So I did a Google search for Eugene kayak maker, and out popped that Eugene became very, very influential. Here's a photo taken on the shores of Baker Lake in the mid-1960s by Eugene Arima while doing field work in the area. The community joined together to replicate the craft that we used in the past. And looking him up on WorldCat Identities, Eugene is quite impressive what he did with his professional life. He had 114 works in many library holdings. He has published as either an author or a junior author of lots of books on canoes, kayaks, Inuit culture, etc. Very impressive. And I was able to eventually reach him, hoping that he had some journal entries about us or maybe some photographs, but that was a dead end. But I did have a nice conversation with him, an 82-year-old Eugene Arima. I also want to thank Busby. I'm not quite sure who he is. He's in my journal. Who hadn't forgotten us when we returned back to Stony Rapid and had a meal and drinks ready. Roast beef. He was a cook at a hotel, and the meat was great. Had over some geologists, a total of 10 people, stayed in school teacher's house. Stony Rapids, rolled out the welcome mat for us. We appreciate that. And when we went to Prince Albert, we sent Busby a gift of I think some wine or something like that for his hospitality. Now, one of the things we were looking for, and one of the things that I remember about the expedition and the times, was there was quite a bit of interest in Eskimo carvings, and we wanted to get some good ones. And I have a little section on that here for you. So on June 25th, when I flew up to Vancouver to pick up Roger Hansell, I stopped off. It was not a nonstop at Seattle Airport, and the prices were just beyond what I could afford as a graduate student. And then in Prince Albert on 6/28, and these are journal entries, waiting in PA. In the meantime, we tried waiting for a flight to Stony. We tried to get Eskimo carvings here at Prince Albert with no luck, and I wasn't the only one who was looking. I think Don was looking as well, and perhaps the other two. Perhaps on the way back, one of the shopkeepers we visited will have some in. Really rare. People wanted to buy these. And then, surprise, when we went to Stony Rapids, We're still at Stony Rapids, hoped to fly out today, but the weather closed in and rain fell. We did get in some canoeing on the river and also played some bridge. Also bought some Eskimo carvings, which we will pick up on the way out. The Chippewa, spelling, Indians handled all of the items we looked at the Hudson Bay Post. When we bought the carvings, we basically bought the collection. Quite a stir went through the room, as it probably confirmed their suspicions of us as being a little touched. Well, we're obviously not going to take Eskimo carvings on the canoe trip, so we left them there. I don't think we paid in advance, and when we came back, we picked them up. And I even have the receipt. And I said to the person, you know, they're more expensive now. And he looked it up and he said, you're right, we raised the price, and I'll give you a less cash price. So for a graduate student, picture the $53, 10 times that amount in terms of buying today in 2021. That's a lot of money for me to have spent $530 buying power. I bought two bears, probably polar bear, one with a seal, one with a walrus. One I gave my parents, and one I gave my late brother. And I retrieved my parents' statue when they were deceased. The one on the right is the one that I picked for myself. Very nice piece. You can see at the bottom of that bird, perhaps it's a gull with the salmon, I guess, in its beak, that the carver's number is on the bottom of the piece. The Canadian government regulates and puts a tag on these original sculptures to protect the carver from being ripped off. And this is carver 1572 from Port Harrison, and his name is Conlucy. So I did a little bit more research for this video on him, wanted to find out more about it, and found, unfortunately, that this individual was born in 1940 and died at the age of 26 in June 24th, 1966. That was 4 days before I bought his piece. And you can see the Eskimo name for Port Harrison there. Really a shame that life is hard up in the barren grounds. All right, I want to give you some kind of ending remarks from my journal. Here we are at Wharton Lake looking toward our pickup. Only 2 more weeks to pick up. Don says he will never go on another trip like this, but will ask for an air transport next time. I doubt whether I'd go on another like this. The paddling and general lack of good food, lack of independence, we all have to eat our meals together, etc., I dislike. And when Chant was interviewed for newspapers in 1966, the quote is that Chant said, "The fishing for lake trout, Arctic grayling, and northern pike is unbelievably good, and this is one of the few reasons he would care to return." He actually returned to Canada. He was at the UC Riverside Biocontrol Department head, and they lured him back to the University of Toronto. He had a distinguished career. He even became provost of the university. August 26, we're at Aberdeen Lake. And I'm talking and you know, as if Joel was not me. Joel did see the tundra, enough to probably turn down any similar trip to this region. Traveling with 3 taxonomists, I wasn't a taxonomist, wasn't easy since, 1, many of the topics discussed were outside my experience. i.e. persons in their field, or not of interest to me, or 2, I may have a mind for details, but certainly not a detailed mind, and sometimes appeared out of kilter with others. Aberdeen, August 25th. All in all, we have been extremely lucky on this trip. Paddling could have been worse, and went through 6 portages we did, certainly did not compare with the 20 plus pre-trip predictions. Our food lasted. We did have to dump some food at the beginning of the trip, but according to our explorer's permit, we had to be self-sufficient from the land. That's why we got 2 caribou, and also all the fishing we did. We would easily have rolled the canoes with the original amount of packs and weight. And we were lucky with the Grant Lake food, finding those fishermen, and especially fuel additions, as well as the great amount of fine weather we have had. That was since that 3-day storm. Now the weather here is turning, remember, this is the end of August. Now the weather here is turning crisp as fall back east. Inside the wildlife cabin that we were staying at, without cooking, the temperature is staying between 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We have been lucky even in our swamping the canoes, which we swamped 1 canoe twice and 1 canoe once. We have been lucky even in our swamping the canoes. The first time, which I described in video 2, may have been less serious than it looked, since that was my 2nd or 3rd rapid. We may have been in some physical danger the first time, but not the second, which we talked about in the 3rd video. We have used the medical kit sparingly and only for some Furacell, something optic, Band-Aids, and suntan lotion. The only bad part of the trip was our loss of photographic equipment, the back of my camera, and I think that Roger lost some equipment as well. Although I hope this does not affect in the long run our slides of the trip. I did have those beautiful slides of the Arctic loons. I still kick myself about that. September 1st, we're in Prince Albert. Our equipment weight at the start of the trip was around 1,350 pounds. That doesn't include people and canoes. Not including weight of people and canoes. Weight coming back out of Stony, they weighed all that stuff, was around 460 pounds. So that was basically our clothing and our collecting equipment. August 25th, Aberdeen. Our equipment has held up reasonably well, although we have a long series of modifications for the tent after it was ripped to shreds. The month we lived mainly off fish is already dim in my memory and 1,000 years away. August 24th, Aberdeen Lake. Don figured out this morning that we paddled 371 miles, averaging on our 30 traveling days 12.3 miles a day. This includes, however, a 2-mile portage day and days when we swamped the canoes. Most miles traveled in one day was 24, and if we had kept going yesterday, where I think we had 19 miles, or the day before, would easily have beat that because of the current and the wind. And John Sperry, in his query that I talked about in the last video, said as an aside in preparation for his trip to this area, which he hasn't gone on yet, he's hoping to do that in 2022, I've calculated some average miles per day from Waldia Lake to Baker Lake as reported by others. So Bill and Linda Layman were traveling at 18.9 miles per day pretty quickly. John and Kate did 17. You can see the list. The Moffatt party, which were doing a lot of filming, traveled at 7.7 miles a day. And guess what? We have the record. We have the slowest pace of anybody on the Dubawnt River. I guess that puts us in some sort of record book. People like to be in record books, I guess. But on days we traveled, it was respectable considering that we were protecting very heavy loaded canoes. And we had someone like me who was a novice and I was worried about every difficult rapid that it came up, and I would have preferred to walk them. So September 1st, Prince Albert. I will finish the journal at this point, assuming we will be in Los Angeles tomorrow. That didn't happen. The trip professionally and educationally was well worth it. The physical stress of the expedition was not great. I have a short memory. Or actually, I have a short memory. It was not great. And the few, that must be wild periods we had, were short indeed. I would have enjoyed the trip more with people of my own interests and personality, but the interperson interactions were on the whole excellent on this trip. This is going to be another Moffatt tell-it-all journal. I want to leave this section with a warning from Bill Layman, and it applies to what I've told you about various parts of our trip. Bill's warning is that his brief document about paddling the Dubawnt is in no way meant to be a definitive guide to this wild and remote subarctic river. All it should be used for is to give a general overview of the how to get there and some of the rapids. Water levels vary radically from year to year, and one person's comfort level on a remote river like this may be far over the head of another person. Now I'm going to show you a set of appendices. I'm not going to spend too much time on each of these. This is from my journal, maybe 5 seconds for each one. I don't want to bore you with this. You could always stop the video and look more closely at it. So first, let's figure out what happened to us after the 1966 trip. In some of these, we will spend a little bit more time. Don Chant. Don died in 2007 after a very, very distinguished career. He became one of the leading environmentalists in Canada during his professional life. Very well known. You can see he has a cigarette in his hand. If you want to know more about him, you can easily look him up on the internet. And there's a detailed obituary with his accomplishments on those two tiny URL links I'm showing you. Jim Chillcott. Here is an obituary from 22 April 1967, the very next year. Ottawa man dies on hike in Nepal. Entomologist Dr. James G.T. Chillcott, only 38, of Ottawa, died of an apparent heart attack Thursday while hiking up a steep hillside trail north of here. He collapsed after climbing for about 2 hours, said Dr. Mason, who was with him. The two men had just begun a 3-day hike, 3 days, north from Kathmandu to a 2-mile-high campsite where they planned to stay until August during a survey of insect life. So he was going to spend the whole summer there. He did that for one summer north of the tree line. The project was sponsored by the Canadian Agricultural Department's Entomology Research Institute. Dr. Chillcott, and it's really a tragedy, is survived by a wife and 5 children. And you can see an obituary for him that was published on the Canadian Entomologist. And a quote from that: Jim's impact on North American dipterology, those are flies, will be enduring, In a short lifespan, he published an exceptional number of solid taxonomic treatments. Roger Hansell. Roger went on, got his PhD at UC Riverside, became a faculty member at the University of Toronto, and this is the information about Roger there. He created a lab dedicated to research and teaching in environmental peace studies. And so he went from studying mites to studying tree line extensions to classification, behavioral evolution, cultural evolution, game theory, very wide-ranging information. He founded the Journal of Environmental Peace, and he is currently president of the Nobel International University, which he founded with Biswajit Ganguly, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So what about this character, Joel Weintraub? Feel like I'm writing my obituary here. Here I am. I have my little website there in genealogy research now. You can see my interests on the upper right, the life of the naturalist Adolphus L. Heermann, who went and did collecting in California. Maybe that attracted me to revise his biography. And then on the left is my work on the 1950 census, which will become public in April of 2022. So I graduated in 1968 with a PhD in biology from UC Riverside. My thesis was on lizard behavior. It was on a semi-arid area. I was a co-winner of the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists Story Award in 1965. I accepted in 1968, when I graduated there, a position with the biology department at California State University of Fullerton, and eventually retired, early retirement, in 2001 as emeritus professor of biology. My interests were in vertebrate ecology, predator food habits, urban ecology with biological planning, and impact assessment, and use of computers in ecology. I consider myself a bridge scientist. I was president in the early 1970s of People Over Pollution in Fullerton, California. That was an incorporated group, an environmental group that emphasized recycling and ran a small reclamation drive each month. I was instrumental in establishing at Cal State Fullerton the Environmental Studies Master's degree and served as the director for a number of years. I oversaw the master's degrees of many students in both biology and environmental studies. In 1995, I was awarded the Orange County Science Education Association's Award for Excellence in Science Education. Appreciated that. In 2017, I was recognized by Sea and Sage Audubon of Orange County, their Conservation Committee, with a letter of commendation to individuals who have made noteworthy contributions to the protection of habitats, natural resources, birds, or wildlife in Orange County. Appreciate that. I continue to educate docent trainees, that's at up in Newport Bay and even at the headlands nearby in Dana Point, and naturalists in birding, and researchers with my census location tools, and my YouTube videos are a logical outreach of my interests. Okay. So we're going to do the next quickly, unless I have something of interest to say. This is from my journal. This is a list of my clothing. As I say, you can always stop this and read through the list. Hopefully it'll be clear enough. There's some of the equipment, what I brought on the plane. I did lose some things during the trip, but it gives you an indication of what I had with me. Appendix 3 are the campsite locations and notes. The latitudes, longitudes are not 2 seconds. They're just 2 minutes. So you can see on a date where we had our campsite. And so if you're interested in finding out from the journal where we were, you can cross correlate them. Going through August, and then got to our destination a week early. That would be the Aberdeen Lake at the bottom. I have some summaries. I wasn't always consistent about each of these stopping points. This is Waldia Lake, Hindi Lake, Boyd Lake, South Carey Lake Inlet, Nicholson Lake, south end of Dubawnt Lake, Grant Lake, Wharton Lake, the Thelon River. Actually, I think we're on our way to Beverly Lake. And then the Aberdeen Canadian Wildlife Service cabin that we stayed in at the end. And another one for Aberdeen Lake. Appendix 4, food lists. I did a lot of auditing. We wanted to be very careful about our food, especially since we left so much behind on day 1 of the canoeing. So here's an audit of food on July 23rd, 1966. This is where we met that fishing party, and the bush pilot said he was going up to Baker to get supplies. He would pick up our list at a predetermined place, and he would bring back the supplies, but there was no guarantee. So we made up a quick list, and then we made up a better list, but he never showed on that. So our high expectations quickly disappeared, and that was too bad. But we were thankful for at least the offer. And then we ran into these fishermen at Grant Lake, and here's all the stuff they gave us. The price they bought this wholesale prices or retail on the package. And so I don't know whether we paid them for this. They gave it to us for free. Very appreciative. And then the second group gave us some, second group of fishermen gave us some more supplies, and including a whole bunch of magazines. I mean, we might as well be in a lounge somewhere of the airport reading magazines. Time magazine, August 5th. We knew exactly what was going on. And then I did an audit of the food on August 20th. At Aberdeen Lake, we used certain things from that Wildlife Service cabin, and we replaced stuff with our own food that we had before we flew into Stony Rapids. Appendix 5 has my list of bird and small mammal lists. Some of my notes there, trying to figure out what that bird is. Did a quick sketch. Decided it was what's called an old squaw, and that common name has been changed to long-tailed duck. And I will show you a list of the birds. Each one of those represents the lake. You can figure out what the lake is. And actually, the species diversity wasn't that great. I think there are only 50 plus species, and I consider myself a relatively good birder. I'm an East Coast birder, very knowledgeable. Okay. In terms of mammal traps, spent a lot of effort. I would go out in the late afternoon, set the traps, either uh, live traps or dead traps, wake up early before anybody else got up, check the traps, retrieve them, go back maybe to sleep, etc. And it turns out I've added in the Aberdeen lake traps to that I put out 1,083 trap nights. That's one trap a night. I got 18 mammals. That's not much, 1.7%. So what's my conclusion? Low populations, wrong bait. They didn't like peanut butter. I don't know. I think the barren. They don't call it the barren grounds for nothing. And then I have a appendix for my journal about. No, this is still the mammal list. Sorry, got ahead of myself. These are the mammal species that I got. And then Appendix 6 are the journal references as of 1966. You can see there. So I hope if you went through my four videos, you joined me in this great adventure that I did as a 24-year-old in 1966. 24 years single, invincible, could do anything. Well, I learned, and here I am close to 80 years old, that life is precious. You got to be real careful. And the Dubawnt river system doesn't have much patience with people who make mistakes. So, hope you enjoyed that. Tell other people about this. And with that, this has been another of my JDW talks. I have YouTube talks on genealogy topics, census resources, Ellis Island immigration, natural history topics including virtual birding field trips, birding optics, Orange County birds, and novelty. I used to collect novelty zithers and sing biology songs in my class. And so I took a chance and actually have a video on singing that might end my YouTube career, actually. So take care. Still COVID out there, and I want to thank again all the people who have helped me put this together. Quite a number.